Hello and welcome to A Pinch of Zest, our podcast series that looks to add a little something extra to how you better support your colleagues. My name is Josh Sweetman-Lemay and I'll be your host for our next episode. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Sheila Marshall of Boutros Bear. Together, we'll be celebrating World Mental Health Day by looking into why the mental well-being of your employees is key and the measures you can take to ensure you're supporting colleagues throughout their journey with you, inside and outside of the workplace. Sheila, welcome to the pod. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about Boutros Bear?
Hi, Josh. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I am the founding CEO of Boutros Bear. We are a healthcare company that supports people in a very profound way. So those with cancer going through chronic pain diagnosis, those with a mental health condition, so that might be stress, anxiety or depression, which is the relevance for our podcast today, and also those that need menopausal support in the workplace.
Perfect. Lovely to have you on, Sheila.
Thank you.
Before we get into it, I just want to dive into a couple of stats that we have from Zest that relate to mental well-being from some of our research. So as we seem to bounce in and out of the cost of living crisis, and as it continues, the likelihood that employees will experience difficulties that impact their mental well-being is on the rise. 59% of businesses say employee wellbeing has been in decline over the past 12 months, with 57% admitting that it's at an all-time low. And it seems to be getting worse the sort of larger the company. And that's little wonder why 83% of employees are now demanding more benefits that contribute to their wellbeing. Sheila, firstly, why is it important to create a workplace environment where employees feel supported to discuss their mental wellbeing?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of it is that if we work somewhere where we don't feel that we can discuss our mental health and well-being, then we're likely to hold that in, and it's going to come out in different ways. So that might come out with disagreement with colleagues in the workplace. It might come out taking time off sporadically without us really understanding why. And if we feel as employees that we won't get supported if we actually talk about our mental health and well-being, then we're unlikely to make that disclosure in the first place. And a disclosure is enormously important. So this is the employee coming forward and saying that I have been struggling with my mental health. And I think one thing I would add to this, Josh, is that there's been a profound change of thought about how we think about mental health and mental well-being. Years ago, we would have thought about some people have stress, anxiety, or depression, and we might have thought about stress, anxiety, and depression being attributed and labeled to people and that they have those conditions. I think the big change that we're finding, and certainly the statistics, a lot of the ones that you've just talk about the fact that we nearly all will experience heightened stress, anxiety, and depression. And I think where we've changed our thought process in terms of mental health and well-being and supporting people in the workplace is this recognition that we all have our own mental health in the same way we have our physical health to deal with and manage. And as we progress through life with life events, they are going to impact us. And I'll give you some of the top examples that we know about. Having a move of home massively is going to contribute to somebody's mental health, feelings of stress, anxiety, insecurity on the move, having to create a new community. This is an enormous life event. Grief of a friend or a loved one is another example where we're going to carry an enormous degree of stress, anxiety, potentially up to depression from going through a grief period. So life is impacting how we are as humans, and we're never going to leave that at home. So that, I think, is a fundamental change in shift of how we think about mental health. I think from an economic perspective, there's 12 billion working days lost economically around the globe from mental health. And as employees, we take off around 18.5 days of annual leave per year through stress and anxiety. So if we aren't making those disclosures, we're going to be using some of our vital annual leave to try and cover for ourselves. That's not that helpful. And in terms of to bring it home to the UK, in the UK, mental health is costing our economy about 56 billion a year, which is really widely reported. And in recognition of that, the government have set something up called the Commissioner for Health.
Wonderful. I mean, that's a great answer. Naturally, you touched on it slightly, but it isn't just an employee's workplace experience that they sometimes need support with, is it? It's obviously naturally they face aspects that impact their life at home too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it segues into what I said earlier, that all of these life events are going to show up in our hearts and minds as we come to the workplace. And if we've got somebody who has been well trained as a line manager and in the leadership team who knows that this is an appropriate response to what we're going through in life and will have an appropriate reaction to us, an element of showing care and compassion and understanding in the workplace, we will be able to share and disclose. And it's not to say, I'm not suggesting that we all come to work and overshare, but I am saying that it's important that our colleagues have an understanding of what we're going through so they can best support us, because we don't turn off our life, it comes into our workplace with us. And if we feel that we do need some extra support, for example, then we should be signposted to the right services that are available to us within our gambit of what the company offers.
Fantastic answer, Sheila. Sometimes these issues can impact an employee and mean that they're absent from the workplace. What are some of the most common?
What, in terms of absenteeism?
Yes, yeah.
So generally there's a very symbiotic relationship between physical and mental health. Obviously, one of the biggest areas of physical health that affects our mental health is anything around the spectrum of persistent and chronic pain. And this can be anything from the lower back pain that many of us will have experienced over the course of our life, where it comes in and out, but we're suffering from lower back pain. It might be a bit sciatic, or upper back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain. This is very, common nowadays with the move to more home working, where we might not be sat on an ergonomic chair, we might not have our stand in the right position, and we might be spending a fraction too long at home at our desk in front of a screen. And so all of these things lead to a lot of musculoskeletal and back and neck pain problems. And we are seeing these post-COVID at an increased rate. And of course, we all know that when your physical health is bad, particularly back pain, which is just horrendous, it's like a toothache that keeps bothering you, this is going to affect your levels of stress, anxiety and depression. So they're completely symbiotic. So chronic pain is a big reason why people are absent from the workplace. We also have women who are of menopausal age, those of which haven't managed to get their menopausal symptoms under control. And I say that in the sense that there are some things that can support women to reduce the side effects and symptoms of the menopause. It's very important that we reach out and get that help. In the past, women have very much just got on with it and assumed that there isn't help out there. There is, and it's really important that we address that. And the third area is cancer. When people have a cancer diagnosis, there will potentially be quite a long treatment pathway, which could involve chemo, radiotherapy, surgery, and then it's their return to work. So we would obviously recommend a phased return to work and a plan so that people don't come in and out of the workplace crashing in and crashing out. So they would be a lot of the main reasons for people being off work. And of course, there are two, when it comes to the 16 to 34-year-olds, their being off work is actually, as you mentioned, and as we started, that group in terms of generationally will be more off work for mental health and mental well-being issues rather than the physical. The physical tends to come later. The baby boomer ages will be more impacted by that. But generally across all of us, mental health is absolutely on the rise.
And do you have any sort of key insights or research from Butcher's Pair in and around mental health and, I guess, absenteeism? I know that we've talked about different generations changing, so baby boomers and obviously Gen Z, and it will differ across obviously different demographics. But yeah, I just wondered if you had any key insights.
Definitely. So we work a lot in the financial services sectors and the professional consultancy sectors, and they tend to have large levels of graduate intake. And in the graduate intake, this is exactly the group that we've talked about, the 16 to 34-year-olds who are also having lots of, this is the report again by the Health Foundation, showing high rates of work limiting conditions and high rates of mental health conditions, which is now higher than what we would see with the baby boomers. And I guess the question is, what's driving that? So what is driving these high rates of mental health conditions in our younger people? And of course, this is the first generation that has really come through with this complete access to everything that's going on in the world available on the phone, and very hard to self-regulate when you've come into mobile phones through your life. You've grown up with them. So what they tend to find is they have immediate access to everything from a social media perspective. There is a hell of a lot in social media of comparing ourselves to others and unattainable lifestyles. So when we start to see ourselves as we are today and compare ourselves to this unnatural environment online, we can feel quite jaded about our own lives. If you add into that the economic burden that we're reading in the papers around, many people of that generation of the 16 to 34-year-olds are very much struggling to be able to afford to live and save for a mortgage. And the world is much more accessible. Travel is more accessible. We spend more, the younger generation is spending more on the here and now, knowing that it's going to be harder to buy a property and a house. So all of this can add to a feeling of long-term uncertainty. And if you add to that as well the job market, which is becoming more challenging now, and the expectation, we're still in this place. It's very good recently to see the Labour Party have just made an announcement about the rights of employees from day one when you enter an organisation. And also it reflects on how we should be working with employees to make sure that when they're not in the office and that they're not working from home, that we don't interrupt their lifestyle during the weekends, because we've created this culture of always being on. So these things are all impacting the 16 to 35-year-olds, and it's increasing their levels of stress, anxiety. I will just touch on as well world events. So we have never been more exposed as a society to seeing what goes on in the world. And I think different generations handle it in different ways. Some people, and it's not black and white, but some people are very good at reading and putting it down and leaving it there. Other people can be ruminating on some of the very bad news stories, and this is also going to impact their mental and physical health. So it's about supporting people to understand how to manage the technological advancements in which we live, because some people are consumed by it, and this is going to have a very negative effect on people's mental and physical health. This is also tying into physically the reduction in going out and connecting with nature and being out walking every day and taking regular exercise, because the more we're engaged digitally and sitting at desks, the less time we have to engage in nature. So I'm just going to touch on a study that came out, and we can share this, Josh, with our notes. The University of Cambridge did a research study with a number of other universities around the world, which was absolutely excellent, on mental health. And it specifically talked about the 7 pillars of healthy habits that improve mental health. And this is a seminal piece of research because it's everything we know, and now we have the research to show how it improves. It is connecting with nature, regular movement and exercise. It's smoking cessation, reducing alcohol consumption, being in a community group and having access regularly to people in the real world. And it's if there is a need for medication, take a medication, but that is the sort of least helpful, and a highly nutritious diet, moving towards anti-inflammatory. But those 7 things hugely support our mental health and also our physical health. So I would say that promoting those things within the workplace, and again, we will share the paper because it shows statistically how each of those 7 components reduce levels of stress, anxiety and depression. And I think that is the core messages that we should be resharing in the world. And I'll just touch on diet. We have all become very used to walking down the corner of where we live, getting an enormous latte, an American measure. There's an over calories in that. There's an over consumption of ultra processed food. Even the oat milk, lots of that is ultra processed. So all of this is having a negative impact on our microbiome and our gut health, which is also impacting our brain. So there is a lot to do with lifestyle that we can support in the workplace and encourage people to really consider how they're living and how to improve that.
When we consider, I guess, in the workplace, obviously a lot of, not so much the responsibility, but the education will fall on the employers. How important is leadership coaching and sort of management workshops in all of this?
I think this is hugely important, Josh. I think it's the most powerful thing we can do, is to actually lead out front as organisations, make the time and the space available to listen to podcasts like we're sharing today, to have roundtables in the workplace, to invite people in to talk about it, and to share each other's tools for what's helpful, what do people enjoy doing, and what is helping them with their mental health and well-being, because this all adds to a level of normalizing that we all experience highs and lows of mental health, and it's about sharing the tools and the techniques which is helpful. And I do think that community, we see this in the work we do at Butcher's Bear. We do great work, but actually the community side of bringing people together to share their experiences is where we are most engaged with each other as humans. So I think bringing that into the workplace and having these sessions means that you really value your people and they know it.
Wonderful. One thing I just want to touch on, and I appreciate obviously everyone is unique. Can you give an example of what a journey back to the workplace might look like for someone that's being treated with Boutros Bear?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Butcher's Bear, there are a number of aspects to how we support people. So if I take a pathway of somebody who's, say somebody who's had a very serious mental health condition, they have had clinical depression. When somebody has clinical depression, when we start working with somebody who's in that place, it wouldn't really be appropriate in those early days to even suggest get out and go for a 5-mile walk or whatever. I mean, come on, these are the days where people struggle to get out of bed. So when they're on our programs, we start from a very quiet level of compassionate support and understanding. So our coaching, so the person on our programs, everyone has access to a 12-week program, one-to-one program, or depending on the condition, we would triage them and they might enter a group-based program. So I'll give the scenario of the 12-week program. We would have triaged to make sure that the person has the right access to the right health coach. The health coach becomes their case manager. And in the mental health example, they would normally start with some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy training, or therapy. And over the course of 6 to 8 weeks, they would meet their therapist and they would really be talking about, it's quite broad. This isn't just about whatever it is that may be in that moment affecting their mental health. It will be very broad. We don't they don't come in with one part. Anywhere the conversation flows, the therapist will deal with that. And the idea over those sessions is to understand what is the cause and then how to start thinking about those behaviors and how we respond to situations. So they will go through CBT therapy, and in doing so, we would have, as I said, we would have already recorded the levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. And over the course of those 6 to 8 weeks, we would then start to introduce the person to their health coach. And the health coach would start to understand the levels of exercise they'd engaged in before and what they would be comfortable to do and set as goals over the next 12 weeks. And they would then start to include some gentle walking movement. We can track to wearables. So if the person is happy for us to do so, we can then just catch up and say, hey, you were planning a walk today. What's up? We see you didn't get out. Do you want to get on a call? So it's very structured. And by increasing those levels, as the University of Cambridge paper said, of movement, exercise, we have community support groups that people, when they're starting to feel that the levels of stress, anxiety, or depression are decreasing, if they wish to join those, they are very welcome to. And then we start to introduce dietary changes. So they will meet the dietitian when they're ready, and we will give them a personalized meal plan, which moves people towards an anti-inflammatory diet. So it's incredibly holistic. And we take our time to go that deep into it, because when we then start to return people to the workplace, they're going to show up consistently. They will have a flare-up plan in place, and they will have measures of self-management and self-care, so that when they start, if in the workplace, they start to feel whatever the illness was that they had, so a flare-up in chronic pain or a flare-up in their mental health condition, a heightened level of anxiety, they will have all of the tools in their toolkit now from their therapists and their health coaches to actually be able to react to that before it gets out of hand. And those lifelong lessons of learning and behavioral change is what we deliver over 12 weeks. So although we stick with somebody for 12 weeks, they have a line to stay with us, to keep checking in with us. And we are looking for lifelong learning and change. And that is the profound difference that this level of care takes, because when people come back to work, they're showing up and they can manage their condition in their own time. And I will share with you some of the excellent testimonials we have that support that, how we've supported people back long term into the workplace. Because some of the alternative, Josh, if I just mention, is that people can have had some form of a healthcare crisis, cancer, chronic pain, or mental health, and they can be pushed back into the workplace full time, crash and burn, and they're back in the work and they're in and they're out, and it's very disruptive for them and it's very disruptive for the organization. So all of our work is about training the line managers, training the executive level, and also the individual as to how to manage their condition really well for the long run, and make sure there's reasonable adjustments in place if they need them.
I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. In terms of overall, and I guess sort of maybe so much from your experience and obviously working with Boutros Bear and everything, are there any simple steps for employees that they can take to help them better prioritize mental well-being?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the things we've talked about today, making sure that the line managers and colleagues understand what it means, understand that it impacts all of us. It's no longer something that's out there. We all have our own mental health and well-being to manage. So really good training. And 87% of managers state that they don't have an appropriate training in supporting people's mental health. Yet at the start of this, we talked about the scale of mental health. I think understanding and seeing the signs that somebody is struggling when they're not talking about it, and this importance of it feeling very much like you can disclose your condition in the organization, that's critical. So that transparency of talking about mental well-being at work, that can be done through listening to podcasts, by having webinars in the workplace, and really engaging in the right level of services that are going to support people. So in all of your talking about mental health, the big question will be, where are you signposting people to? And I think that you may need, most organizations will need a level of, so there can be some in crisis, see a therapist where you can have an in crisis session, and that would normally be in your EAP. But to provide a deeper level of something that is going to deliver long-term results for people, that really shows a true commitment to supporting people's mental and physical health. So I would suggest really reviewing the benefits and how they serve you. And of course, all of these have everything to do with managing people with chronic illness or mental health. All has an absolute high degree of return on investment. It tends to be a 4x, 5x return on investment, because if you can keep people in the workplace performing well, happy, you haven't got the risk of them leaving and the cost of re-employing somebody. So it's very important that people see that. And as we talked about earlier, the rates of it are so high, it's absolutely worth that investment. Some of the very low value things you can do is setting up sort of community walking support groups, things like that. But in the workplace, thinking about what could you do from a physical health perspective that is also going to improve people's mental health. And a lunchtime walk where you walk with different colleagues on the one day you're in the office. We talked earlier about you guys tend to be in once a week. If on that day you guys got to go out and go for a walk in the nearest woods together or in the local park, that sort of thing can be enormously helpful from a communication across departments as well. And it's far better than, you know, the older sense of the workplace when we were bonding with colleagues, we would go to the pub and sink 3 pints. And that's probably not the best thing to do. We're still in organisations. There's been a trend I've noticed over the last few years where in all the new modern office blocks, I've called it out every time I've seen it, but there's been like wine fridges and beer on tap and stuff in an office, which is just the complete opposite to supporting our mental health. So I would say don't do that and instead go for the walks in nature and try and think of how to do bonding outside a pub or restaurant environment.
Fantastic, Sheila. And finally, just to finish, how important is it for employers to invest in wellbeing? I know you mentioned earlier, obviously, you have the talent attraction, retention side of things, and investing can obviously save companies a lot of money. So why do you think it's important for them to invest in wellbeing, and what impacts can employees expect to see when they do so?
So I think the biggest thing is the employee retention, because it's so prolific. On the basis we can talk about it, we can get some support, we can get access to the right programs in the organization when we have it, when we experience it, from wherever it's come from. It may be workplace stress or it could be home life, as we talked about. But if we can get the support, we're going to stay in the workplace. And retention of staff and the retention of their knowledge is an enormous economic factor for employers to think about. The other aspect is, of course, is the perception of the company in the world. As any organisation, you want to do the right thing. There are a number of employee review platforms that are available now. And if somebody has come forward to you as an organisation and not received the right level of care and support, the consequences could be horrendous to them, to their family, and to their colleagues. But yet, if they have the right level of support and they are able to review it and say, I've been so well looked after by the organisation, not only have you got their loyalty in a very difficult employee marketplace, you've also got the loyalty of the colleagues around them because they know the person has been well supported. And I think having those tools in place to be able to deal with flare-up plans and having that education of the person with the condition, and also the line manager having the confidence to have the conversation, because there is a lot of legality around how you talk to somebody with any health condition, and you can't over ask the questions. It's not up to us to delve into asking somebody what is wrong with them. Be it, the classic example is cancer, that in a cancer scenario, we can often be asked. I obviously founded this company off the back of my own diagnosis of breast cancer 7 years ago. And when I first walked around afterwards, I would often be asked, oh, where was it? What type of good, what grade and what stage? And, are you going to make it? And all of these. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe people just ask that. And of course, and then the next wave of things that people would say to me is, my Aunt Jane had it, or my Uncle Billy. And I'll go, yeah. And thinking, are Jane and Billy all right? No, they're dead. And you think, oh my God. So I've been through all of those scenarios. And I would say it is vital to have the training so that people know how to conduct the conversation, how to make the space for those conversations, because this stuff doesn't just come out in a busy working life. You've got to create space where people have got one-to-ones, they're away from everyone else, and they feel they can start to open up. So opening up, having the conversation, and this all leads to enormous economic value in the retention of staff, the feeling of the staff towards the organisation, the loyalty of the staff, and productivity is going to increase, because somebody dipping in and out of the workplace because of their illness is very disruptive, both to them and to the organisation. So it's far better that somebody has a graded return to work, gets themselves into a place where they can support their condition when it flares up, and stay in the workplace consistently. And there is an enormous value in that. And we can share statistically what those numbers look like, because I think most organizations recognize that an enormous part of their cost is, we've just done some recruitment, and recruiters' fees are enormous, but actually it's a very competitive marketplace for employees, good employees. And so you pay the fees, and they start at 6%. They can go up to 100% depending on the level of the person in the organization. And for that reason, there is an enormous benefit in keeping people and their knowledge of working with you in the organization. So there's everything to be said for it. And everyone feels very good about you as a company when you care about your people.
Listen, Sheila, we really appreciate you joining our pod. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear a little bit more from yourselves, especially a little bit about Boutros Bear as well. If you're interested in finding out more about Boutros Bear, then you can find out about them on our Zest Marketplace page. But for now, Sheila, thanks once again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Josh. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.